The Netherlands faces political chaos. Dutch far-right politician Geert Wilders abruptly withdrew his party from the governing coalition, setting the stage for snap elections. So will his bet on a push to toughen immigration policy deliver election victory and secure his ambition of becoming Prime Minister? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Tom McRae. He's been dubbed the Dutch Donald Trump. Geert Wilders has pulled his Party for Freedom, or PVV, out of the coalition that governs the Netherlands in a row over immigration policy. It's plunged the NATO ally into political turmoil and potentially new elections. After years in opposition, the PVV won the most votes in 2023 by tapping into rising populism in Europe with promises to reduce immigration. He's pushed for his 10-point plan that calls for the militarization of Dutch borders, as well as the repatriation of all Syrian nationals, something his coalition partners rejected. Well, before resigning, Prime Minister Dick Schoof labelled Wilders' actions irresponsible, coming at a critical time for Europe. So was this a reckless or strategic move by Wilders? And will it deepen uncertainty in the region only weeks before a NATO summit in The Hague? We'll get to our panel of guests in just a moment, but first, this report by Boateng.
The Netherlands is in political turmoil after the abrupt exit of the far-right PVV, or Freedom Party, from the ruling coalition. Its leader, Geert Wilders, blaming a lack of progress on his plans to restrict asylum on his decision to withdraw. A controversial figure in Dutch politics for decades, Wilders' party won a quarter of the national vote in elections in November 2023. The PVV has an anti-immigration and anti-Islam agenda. It includes proposals for a ban on Islamic headscarves and plans to send back Syrian asylum seekers. Wilders says Syria is safe following the fall of Bashar al-Assad in December.
We've proposed a plan to close the borders to asylum seekers, to stop them, to send them away, to no longer build reception centres, but to close them. I've requested the signature of the coalition partners, former coalition partners I should say, at least for the majority of those measures. They didn't do that.
Prime Minister Dick Schoof led the fragile coalition for just under a year. He was left with little option but to resign.
In recent days, I have repeatedly informed all four party leaders that, in my opinion, the fall of the cabinet was unnecessary and irresponsible. We face significant national and international challenges, and decisiveness is required now more than ever.
Observers say Wilders is taking a gamble that he hopes will pay off in new elections. The collapse of the coalition means a caretaker government, unable to take any policy decisions, will host world leaders for a NATO summit later this month at The Hague. New elections are unlikely before October, leaving the Netherlands in political paralysis for months ahead. Boateng, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
Okay, let's bring in our guest now. Joining us from Enschede in the Netherlands is Henk Vanderulk. He is a professor of electoral politics at the University of Amsterdam. Zoe Gardner is an independent researcher covering migration policy. She joins us from London. And joining us from Brussels is Peter Klepper. He is editor-in-chief at brusselsreport.eu. Thank you so much for joining us here on Inside Story. Henk, if I can begin with you, please. I mean, it seems like it was really only a matter of time before this coalition was all going to completely fall apart. Can you just give us an idea, seeing that you're in the Netherlands for us, what's the feeling there among Dutch voters? I mean, how angry are they about all of this?
Well, it depends, of course, on which position of the political scale you are. At the left, you see a lot of relief because this cabinet didn't do anything. It didn't accomplish anything. And on the right, you can see some disappointment. But I think that currently, at least, relief dominates because, again, this cabinet was unable to solve any of the pressing issues, both in the context of environment and migration.
Zoe, I mean, as we've heard there in the story that we just ran, this is really all over immigration, or that's how it's been put forward. But before we get to Wilders and his specific policies and exactly what he has been trying to do, can you just give us a little bit of context about really the number of immigrants and migrants that have been seeking asylum there in the Netherlands and how big an issue it really is?
Well, this has been much more of a political issue than really an issue of numbers. In fact, across the entirety of Europe in the last couple of years, we've seen a gradual decrease in the number of people entering through the external borders and then spreading out as they do and seeking asylum across the different countries. So this is something that has been built up into a massive political storm in the Netherlands and actually across the entire continent. And what we're seeing is a breakdown in the cordon sanitaire, the firewall against cooperation with the far right from the traditional parties of the centre and the centre-right across Europe. And what we see as a result of that is that, of course, the far right needs to differentiate itself, needs to always be the one pushing for the most extreme measures. They cannot be satisfied without measures that would violate international law, national law, regional EU law. They demand measures that would create severe harm to our communities. And in the end, they send everything up in flames because their intention is always to push for a more extreme outcome.
And Peter, I mean, this, as we said, probably didn't come as a complete surprise, the collapse of the coalition. But how is it viewed by others in Europe? Is this turning into a bit of a headache for the EU now?
Well, EU officials, of course, were not very sympathetic to the agenda of Geert Wilders. I guess now there's a lot of hope that a new government will basically go back to the old same ways. But I don't think that's that's a justified expectation. What you're likely to see is a demand all across Western Europe not to tackle immigration in itself, but to try to completely stop the irregular migration flows that we have been seeing over the last decades, really. And that is also causing lots of pressure on reception capacity. It's causing community tensions. Specifically in the Netherlands, there are some arrangements where these people, under certain conditions, have priority over social housing. So the new government, or the government which has just collapsed, basically, one of their promises was to try to change a lot of that, but that has not happened because you have a whole framework of international agreements, of national law that you will need to change. That has been built up over decades, really, and that was frankly not foreseen for the current pressures that we've seen with the ability of people to travel more easily, and therefore many more people, flowing into the asylum system.
Yeah, there's obviously much wider repercussions to all of this. I just want to bring you the very latest from what we've heard. The Dutch Parliament has held a debate on how a caretaker government might operate going forward. Now, while addressing Parliament, Wilders defended his decision to withdraw his party's support from the ruling coalition, and he was promptly criticised.
Our country is at risk of becoming a large asylum seekers centre. Every day I receive dozens of emails from people complaining about an asylum seekers centre being established near them, with all the consequences of nuisance and crime that comes with it. And we already have a huge shortage in this country of housing, healthcare, education and finances. The PVV won the election a year and a half ago for a reason. Nearly 2.5 million people entrusted us with the task of reducing the influx of asylum seekers and establishing the strictest asylum policy ever.
When responsibility must be taken, when difficult decisions must be made, Mr. Wilders does not deliver. That is something we knew. We had experience and had done it before. In 2012, Mr. Wilders also walked away. Look specifically at the VVD. It has happened to you before. You could have calculated that it would happen again, and yet you chose a coalition with him. And I call on all parties in this House to be clear about this. clearly state that it is not in the national interest to allow someone to power who ultimately always leads to paralysis, to not finding solutions and to seeking conflict.
Not surprising that the opposition party is getting stuck into Wilders as well as his coalition partners. Henk, if we can come to you once again, I mean, does the issue of immigration, does that resonate with people there? Obviously, Wilders got more votes than any other party in the last election. Can you just explain why that is and just how widely accepted some of his policy ideas are?
Yeah, I agree. This is really a political issue, made a political issue, and made during the campaign of 2023. There is not really a real problem because, as one of the previous speakers said, the number of asylum seekers is going down. But it is a clear and simple story and can be attached to many of the real problems that are present in the Netherlands. Housing problems, educational problems, healthcare problems. All these problems can easily be, seen as being solved if we solve the immigration problem. That's not true, but it's an easy story. And Wilders was very good at selling that story.
Yeah, Zoe, I mean, we heard a little bit about some of his specific immigration policies. I mean, he's really pushed for this 10-point plan, which calls for a number of things, including the militarization of the Dutch borders, as well as repatriating all Syrian nationals. Can you just give us a little bit more context and specifically your thoughts about some of those plans that he has put forward?
Yes, well, I mean, the militarization of the Dutch border is an insane plan, in my personal opinion. I mean, we're talking about creating a military zone between European countries. That is a regression to a situation that I don't think anybody in Europe really ever thought that we would be going back to, a very, very dark time in our history. And it sort of highlights one of the huge contradictions and fallacies in this regional rise in far-right parties. Each one of them says, no, immigrants shouldn't come here. And what that means in practice is not that the immigrants disappear, but that they are pushed into the hands of their neighbor. And the neighbor, of course, says, no, anywhere else, but just not here. And they push them again. And these people are simply displaced, but they do not disappear. And that is the big tension that's going on between, this, on the one hand, this international cabal of far-right leaders who are gaining power across European countries, and the clear tension between their policies. Because the reality is that the real problems that we have heard about, the problems of housing, the problems of healthcare, these are created by the fact that we have an aging population across Europe. We have a demographic crisis. What it means when we are growing older, and in the Netherlands, they have a birth rate of under 1.5%. They are not replacing their working age population, but their population of people who are over the age of 60, over the age of 80 is growing. Those people need and deserve more care. They go to the doctor more often. They spend more time in hospital. That is what is putting a strain on European health systems. And the fact of the matter is, no matter how good of a story and how simple and compelling it is that Geert Wilders and other far-right politicians tell about migration, the fact is that we need people. And there are people who need to come here. And therefore, they are not going to stop people from coming here. But they can always pursue a politics that promises to stop people. And what it does, in fact, is it harms people. And it harms our society by creating these awful racist divisions. And it is absolutely shocking that we have seen a total failure from the centre-left and the left in Europe to stand up to these politics on their own terms, and not just to accuse Wilders and his party of not being able to govern, but also of having the wrong ideas of how to govern.
Zoe, basically what you're saying is that the far left or the centre left has really failed here. Peter, as we've seen, it's not just the Netherlands that is prone to this anti-immigration sentiment. I mean, just a few days ago, the Polish Conservative Karol Nawrocki was announced the winner of the weekend's presidential runoff election. That suggests, even though it was very narrow, that Poland's going to take a more populist and nationalist path under that president. What does that signal about the direction of the EU, that this isn't just a one-off, it's not isolated, it is becoming much further, much more widespread?
Oh yeah, it's clearly a trend. Now, I do think that many Europeans are open to the idea of labor migration, both within Europe and from non-European countries to Europe, under certain conditions, under the condition that everything happens legally. I think the best gift to the anti-migration campaigners is the chaotic migration flows that we have been witnessing over the last decades, which in some cases were also linked to terrorism. Remember the Brussels attacks, which could not have happened without the chaotic migration flows. So I think if you care about migration, the very, very first step should be to make sure that you stop all illegal migration, which Australia has succeeded to a large degree. And the country thereby was able to also, it still invites refugees, but directly from the refugee camps, notably in Sudan in that case, but completely cracked the business model of the human smuggling mafia. So I think that is what the mainstream in Europe is clearly desiring, not to stop all migration. I mean, that is crazy, certainly within Europe in today's world, but to make sure that the democratic choices about how many migrants are welcome on a certain territory are respected.
Henk, if we can come to you, we heard a little bit more about the failure of the centre-left to really stand up and push back against this sentiment. Why is that? Why have they not been able to be strong enough to resist and I guess sell their message in turn?
There are two questions. The first one, I want to respond to the previous statement about policies lacking that really fight immigration in Europe. That story assumes that populist parties are actually interested in limiting migration. And what we've seen in the context of Wilders is that he was not really interested in solving the problem, interested in that at all. He was interested in creating a lot of fuzz about the problem. He was interested in gaining votes over the problem. But the idea that he was trying to solve the issue, I've never seen that. He appointed a minister, Faber, who was definitely not able to develop policies that found support in the rest of Parliament. So we should not equate solving a maybe pressing problem with what happened here in the context of populist parties, because that's definitely different. Now, the second issue, the question you asked, is why are the other political parties not able to solve the issue? That is because the issue itself is not easily solved. It is a fundamental problem. Everyone thinks that the problem can be solved, but this is mainly a consequence of economic developments and conflicts elsewhere in the world. And we all know that economic developments and conflicts elsewhere in the world are not easily managed. It's not something you can do nationally. Maybe you can do something in Europe, but definitely not in an independent state like the Netherlands.
Zoe, I saw you really wanting to jump in earlier, so I'll give you a chance to respond as well. But if you could also give us the consequences, the long-term consequences of this anti-immigration rhetoric as well.
Absolutely, yes. Well, I wanted to come back on the suggestion, first of all, that Australia has had success in preventing asylum seekers from reaching its shores. I mean, it is fundamentally ridiculous to compare the Netherlands to Australia, given the geographical differences between them are pretty significant in terms of how easy it is to reach them, obviously. But also, I work closely with my colleagues in Australia at the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre in Melbourne, and they would explain to you that asylum seekers have not disappeared from Australia. This is a completely false narrative, that by being harsh and by being cruel, you can make these people disappear. Even in Australia, thousands and thousands of people are seeking asylum every year, and politics continues to be driven by it. And that is the same all around the world, because as the other guest has pointed out, these these movements are driven by people who need to move. There are people who need to move. We're talking about sending Syrians back to Syria right now. That is quite obviously deranged, dangerous, inhumane, unthinkable, and totally illegal, obviously, in any court of law. So it couldn't have been done by the Dutch government either. What we're talking about is people who need to move and countries who desperately need people to come here in order to work. And the way to stop that from happening in chaos is not to stop the illegal side and encourage the legal side. That doesn't make any sense. You can't stop the illegal side because you have made something necessary illegal. The way to make it happen in regulated ways is to regulate those refugee flows, create safe ways into Europe, and get those people who are coming here, who are a resource, again, that we desperately need, get them into training, get them into work. That is what they want to do. They come here for safety and they come here for opportunity. We have that opportunity. We have that desperate need for them. Longer term, this is the only way forward. Longer term, there is nobody who looks at migration seriously and will tell you, oh yeah, Europe's around the corner from working out a return hub or a border policy that's actually going to stop this from happening. Everybody knows we're not going to stop this from happening. People need to move. People have always moved, and we need people. And therefore, the only way to approach this is to manage it humanely, to help people to reach us without that chaos, which then, as the other guest did say, that chaos is what fuels these far-right firebrand politicians. But they have always been here. They have always spread hate. About every wave of migration that has ever come to Europe, there has been a far-right politician telling us that this is the end of our civilization, and it never has been, and it will not be this time. But we must manage it properly.
Okay. Peter, I want to come to you because in the next couple of weeks, there's going to be a NATO summit that's being held in The Hague, which is set to potentially significantly boost defence spending. But that really is something that Wilders has been against. Is this all going to be affected now? How do you think it's going to play out there?
Well, that's all going to depend on the majority in the Dutch parliament. Wilders may have had other motives apart from migration to end this government. Some people speculate it's the defense spending increases that the Dutch government was signing up to. But ultimately, you know, in the grand scheme of things, migration is at the heart of the debate. And one of the problems, I think, was, yes, probably Wilders made many mistakes himself, but he was not able to, generate real reform, partly because the coalition partners did not play along. And they will deny that. But if you look recently, there was a letter sent by 9 European governments calling for reform of the at the level of the judges, of their interpretation of the European Convention of Human Rights. Now, these judges in Strasbourg have been constraining immigration policies for a long time. This is one of the reasons why so many people are dying at sea, 30,000 in the last 10 years, as opposed to Australia, where they don't have those constraints. Now, the coalition partners in the Netherlands have prevented that the Netherlands would also sign up to this very modest letter, which was urging the Strasbourg court to take a more sensible interpretation, not to demean human rights by basically redefining human rights as something that is in line with some social democratic party program, right? So I think also there has not been sufficient attention. People have looked at and have criticized Wilders, and they have a point often, but also coalition partners, I think, should reflect on their responsibility.
Okay. Henk, I can see you sighing and shaking your head there. So if you can just very quickly respond to Peter, because I also want to get on to what you think is going to happen next, because Prime Minister Schoof has confirmed that there will be an election, but hasn't not given a date as of yet.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the first, and I think the most important point is that saying that Wilders didn't manage to solve the problem because of his coalition partners is a bit of a strange idea about policy making in the Netherlands. The minister responsible for this topic, Minister Faber, who is a PVV, well, not member because the party doesn't have members, but a PVV minister, didn't deliver any serious law proposal to Parliament and didn't build any coalition, not within the coalition, not outside, because there is you need a majority also in the first chamber. She didn't manage to do anything of that at all. So the story that Wilders was unable to pursue these policies because of the coalition parties is not in line with reality, I think. I think that's the most important point. We could also discuss not signing the letter to the European Union, but let's not go into that area because you wanted to talk about what's going on now.
Yeah, just quickly, if you can, Henk, how ineffective, I mean, what's the point of this interim government and how quickly should elections be held? Are people calling for this to be done immediately? What's the sense there?
Well, the main issue is that law does not allow us to have elections within 3 months. It will take at least 100 days and probably a bit more, so 120 days before we have elections. Now, that's a very complex story, but it has to do with both the constitution and all kinds of additional laws that force us to have elections not within a short amount of time. So that's what's going on. The caretaker government is not completely powerless. It can still try to find majorities in parliament to pursue some policies. And for example, today it was announced that policies in the context of migration will still be pursued by this government and will be supported probably by a majority in parliament. And hopefully then these policies will have a proper support in parliament, and the minister going to replace Faber, because Faber is now out, PVV ministers are all out of the government, that minister may be able to form majorities in parliament.
Zoe, I want to leave the last word for you because we've only got a couple of minutes left. Obviously, there's going to be another election in the Netherlands very shortly. What would be your advice for those on the left and the centre left to try and get their message across? Because we know immigration is probably going to be the keystone issue here. What do they need to do?
I think what's really necessary is that the politicians of the centre and the centre left and so on recognize that there is a real problem. The real problem is that our economic system is crumbling and failing across Europe, that the lifestyles that we were promised if we worked hard are becoming unachievable, that my generation has no hope of buying a house, and that more and more this is happening while the richest people in our societies are getting richer. The number of people, the demand for private jet flights across Europe is skyrocketing. And that is happening while ordinary people are being told to blame migrants for their real problems. And so you have to recognize and take on the vested interests of those elite powers, of those people who are hoarding more and more of our resources and more of our wealth for themselves. Because if you don't, then the only other narrative in town is the one that says blame that brown person. And it will win against you if you do not accept that we have to change. People want change. People want change to the economic system that is failing them. They want to know that they will be provided for in their old age. They can have that with migration managed well, but they can only have it if we take on the rich and we tax them more and we put that money into our welfare states across Europe. And we revive that dream of what Europe was supposed to be, which is a place that supports its weakest members, not one that leaves them to be caught up in this hateful rhetoric.
OK, we'll have to leave it there. But Henk, Zoe and Peter, thank you so much for your time and your insights. It'll be fascinating to see exactly how it all plays out there in the Netherlands in the next few months. Well, thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, that is aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. For me, Tom McRae, and the whole team here, goodbye for now.